So here we go. Today we're with Adam Sudd, very 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 special and very important guy in the. He's a leader in the plant based nutrition world. Today's webinar is called Shift Happens, and Adam's going to tell you how he overcame type 2 diabetes, how he overcame food addiction, and how he adopted a plant based lifestyle to really fully commit to positive change in his lifestyle that has completely transformed him from the inside out. So go for it, Adam.
Okay, so hi everybody. I'm very honored to be here, and what I'm going to cover with you today is a personal commitment to change, which is really identifying your why, and then when we want to do that, we have to understand our compulsions. So we're going to talk about understanding our compulsions. And then we're going to talk about how we can create an environment where we can, at the end of the day, be making positive change no matter our situation. And all of this is going to be a part of how I was able to reverse type 2 diabetes and how you can reverse type 2 diabetes by following these three things. But first, I'd like to share with you my story. So I think Robbie and Cyrus are going to introduce themselves first.
That's exactly right. And then we can go right into your story for sure.
Yeah.
So we'd love for you guys to, we got an awesome bonus offer for you guys today. So stay to the end of the webinar for sure, because you're definitely going to want to take advantage of what we got in store for you. It's probably our best offer to date, no question. I'll give you my quick story. I think a lot of you guys already know who I am. My name is Cyrus, and I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 22. I went through a whole series of very confusing information, adopted a low carbohydrate diet, felt terrible, couldn't exercise, used insulin way more than was necessary. I switched to a whole food plant-based diet that was very low in fat. And as a result of that, in a very short period of time, I was able to cut my insulin use and increase my carbohydrate intake. So I was eating more carbohydrate for less insulin. I put myself back to graduate school to go get a PhD in the subject of insulin resistance. And as you can see me here, I eat almost 1,000 grams of carbohydrate per day, which is more than most people eat in a month. And I've been able to cut my insulin use by 40%. My A1C values are consistently between 5.4 and 5.7%. And I absolutely love the way I feel. I absolutely love it.
And my name is Robbie Barbero, and I am also living with type 1 diabetes and have just found extraordinary benefits from the lifestyle that we're talking about today, the lifestyle that's transformed Adam's life, transformed Cyrus's life. And I'm just happy, and I just love life because health is wealth, and I feel healthy and I feel amazing on a daily basis. So my current A1C right now is 6.6. Over the past 10, 11 years now, I have eaten nothing but fruits and vegetables, never had an A1C above 6.6, usually ranging in the 5.7, 5.9 range, and sometimes in the mid-sixes. And I'm active every day because I have the energy and health to be active, and I love it. So let's get into the real superstar of the show today.
So my name is Adam Sudd. I'm also known on social media as the Plant-Based Act. And I'm going to talk to you guys about not only how I was able to reverse type 2 diabetes, lose 170 pounds, get off all my oral medications, reverse my food addiction, my depression, my erectile dysfunction. But first, I want to start from the beginning. So Cyrus, for the next slide, this is my family. I am a 7th generation Texan and a Jew. And I grew up eating the diet of my culture. I ate burgers and barbecue and bagels and blintzes. I like to describe my diet as the American diet, wearing cowboy boots with some chutzpah. And look, I had a lot of friends. I played sports. There are a few things that really profoundly affected my life. One, my relationship with my father. My father, when he was 25, his father died from colon cancer. As a result of losing his father, he becomes very hypercritical when he sees people that he loves engaging in lifestyle behaviors that threaten their health. And even from a very young age, I was criticized for wanting to eat the foods that were considered bad foods, the junk foods that all the kids want to eat. I can remember being 11 years old and my mom putting cinnamon rolls down at the breakfast table and saying, you guys, you're only allowed to have one. And as soon as she left, I grabbed 2, put them in my pocket, run into my bedroom, turn off the lights, sit in the corner, and eat them in the dark, because I was ashamed and I was afraid that if someone saw me doing this, that I would be considered bad. I became a closet eater as a 12-year-old. I was also diagnosed with ADHD and put on Ritalin. So essentially, I had a doctor who was telling me that there's something about you that doesn't work properly, that the world doesn't think works right. But if you take this pill, everything's fine. Nothing about the discussion that what we're actually trying to correct is behavior, not who you are as a person. So from that point on, I believe that anytime I saw something that the world didn't agree with, something about me that others didn't like, I was going to look for a substance outside of myself to fix it. And in high school, Ritalin became Adderall, and I became addicted to Adderall. It worked for me in high school, but in college, things started to change. I started to need more of the drug. I started to care less and less about my classes, less and less about being with my friends or socializing. I started to stop going to classes, buying drugs on the street. And as a sophomore in college, I dropped out of college, came back to Austin, and actually ended up becoming a criminal drug addict. I was doctor shopping. That's where you have multiple doctors prescribing the same medications without them knowing about each other. It's a felony. I was forging and altering prescriptions, which is a felony. I was avoiding my family except to borrow money, treating my parents like an ATM. The only time I would ever see them was either to get into a fight with them or to borrow money. I was becoming increasingly depressed, and I was avoiding my friends. I became a hoarder. And there's a quote on the next slide that says, "Nothing records the effects of a sad life so graphically as the human body." I want to introduce you guys to my sad life. On the next slide, you'll see this was me 5 years ago. I was over 300 pounds. I was a criminal drug addict and a fast food addict. Now, when I say I was a fast food addict, I'm going to explain to you what that means. So on the next slide, I'm going to explain to you what my diet looked like. So for breakfast, you'll see that I would have 4 potato, egg, and cheese breakfast tacos. I'd get up in the morning, I'd go to Torchy's Tacos and get 4 potato, egg, and cheese breakfast tacos. Then for my first lunch, I would go to McDonald's, get 2 double quarter pounder meals with an extra side of fries. For my second lunch, I would go to a place called Whataburger and get the honey barbecue chicken strip sandwich meal. Then for dinner, I would order an extra large pizza with beef from Papa John's with the side of their chicken strips with the honey mustard dipping sauce. Then at about 2 in the morning, I would go back to Whataburger for 3 of their breakfast on a bun sausage sandwiches. During the course of the day, I would drink about 15 sodas. Now, on the next page, you're going to see what I mean when I say I'm a drug addict. The typical prescription dosage for Adderall is about 30 milligrams per day. My usage was 450 milligrams per day. I was doing 450 milligrams per day for 6 days straight. I wouldn't sleep, and by the end of it, I would enter the beginning stages of a drug-induced psychosis. I would start to experience extreme OCD symptoms, one of which was I couldn't stand to have the hair touch behind my ear. And I can remember one night staying up all night long, brushing the hair back and forth from the side of my head because it was bothering so much. And I was brushing so hard that by the morning when I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror, all of the hair on the side of my head had been brushed off. It was completely bald. I was avoiding everybody. And luckily, at about this time, my dad, who has been involved with Whole Foods Market since the beginning, saw an opportunity to help his son. And he came to me and he said, "Adam, I want you to go to this total health immersion hosted by this guy named Rip Esselstyn. It's called the Engine 2 Total Health Immersion. Will you please go?" I didn't really want to go. The only reason I went was because I knew that if I went, my dad would keep giving me money. And that's what I wanted. So I said yes. I went to the immersion. I listened to everything that was being said, but you better believe it, I was a drug addict at the immersion, and I brought drugs with me, and I was doing them there. I can remember in my bedroom, on the desk, all my drugs I was going to do laid out for the day. I went to every session. I listened to everything that was being said. It all made sense to me. I learned how that if I adopted a low-fat, plant-based diet, I could reverse chronic Western disease. I could lose weight. I could make myself heart attack proof. Everything sounded right. It made sense to me. I was a person who called himself an animal lover, but ate animals for every meal. It spoke to me, but I wasn't desperate enough. On the next slide, you'll see what happens a year later. This is when desperation finally hit. This is what I mean when I say I lived like a hoarder. I would come home from shopping at a store called Casual Male XL because it was the only store I could go to where I could find pants that had a 50-inch waist. I would come home from shopping feeling horrible about myself, stand in front of the mirror, take off my shirt, and just look at myself. See all the bed sores, see all the rashes because I wasn't bathing, see all the stretch marks, the odd shapes. I'd look at it and I would hate it so much that I would literally start to punch myself as hard as I could over and over again, shouting at myself in the mirror, I hate you, until I would start to cry. I would look at all the welts and red marks that I'd left on myself from the beating and realizing that there was never going to be a day that I saw where any of this was going to get any better. I was 30 years old. I had erectile dysfunction. I was a college dropout. I was a drug addict, and I was a month away from being homeless. I had never felt so worthless, and I thought to myself, what is the point of doing any of this if nothing's ever going to get better? So that night, I decided I was going to pop more pills than I've ever taken before, and if I died, I died. And right in front of that couch is where I felt this cramp in my stomach, and I tried to stand up, and I buckled over, and I threw up on the floor and passed out. There I am, 30 years old, passed out in a puddle of vomit, surrounded by empty fast food garbage, surrounded by empty pill bottles, dying at age 30 from a life of drugs, fast food, anger, and denial. Somehow, I regained consciousness, looked at what was happening to me, and the first thing I thought was, if I keep this up, my family is going to spend the rest of their lives asking themselves why in the world their son needed to eat and drug himself to death. And since they're not addicts, they're not going to understand that no matter what they said, no matter what they did, there's nothing they could do until I was ready to change. And they would carry that guilt, believing that it was their fault for the rest of their life. I decided that I was not going to let that happen. And I decided that since I didn't die, I had an opportunity for a comeback. And I picked up the phone and I called two people who, let me tell you, there were nights when we had fights where I said things that were so bad I'll never repeat them. I would leave, and I can only imagine them sitting in their bedroom thinking, were those horrible things he just said the last things we're ever going to hear him say? They picked up the phone. I asked for help. They didn't judge me. They didn't question me. They just said, Adam, we're going to help you. And 2 weeks later, I checked into rehab. So in the next slide, I'm going to talk about what happened at rehab. First 24 hours of rehab are pretty difficult. You get tested for a lot of things. There's a lot of medical testing. There's a lot of psychological testing. It's kind of dehumanizing. I found out in the first 48 hours that I was not only a severely suicidally depressed addict, but I had type 2 diabetes with a fasting blood sugar of over 300, an A1C of over 9. I don't remember the exact numbers. I had blood pressure that was so high that the doctor made it mandatory that they monitor my blood pressure every single morning for the first week before I could leave my dorm room because they were so afraid I was going to have a heart attack. When I got up in the morning, my resting heart rate was over 120. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, suicidal depression, bipolar-like disorder, ADHD, and anxiety disorder. I was put on medications. The next slide will talk about my medications. I was put on type 2 diabetes medication, high blood pressure medication, antidepressants, mood stabilizers, ADHD medications, and sleeping medications. I felt worthless. I knew that all of this was my fault. I went to my dorm room. I picked up the phone. I called my dad. I said, Dad, I don't really know what to say. Now I'm finding out I have type 2 diabetes and high blood pressure. I'm very scared. I thought all I had to do was get off the drugs. I didn't know it was going to be this bad. And he said to me, Adam, let's just say that you have diabetes and heart disease. You learned at the Engine to Immersion that you can reverse this through lifestyle. He said, if there's something about your life that you don't like and you can change it, you don't have a problem. He helped me realize that since I was the problem, I get to be the solution. I left rehab, entered sober living, and started a new lifestyle. The next slide. My new lifestyle included these things. I transitioned to a low-fat, plant-based diet. This wasn't easy, but I did what was necessary. And in 6 months, I reversed my diabetes and high blood pressure. I went from a fasting blood sugar of over 300 to off medications in 6 months, lost over 100 pounds in 10 months, and in 1 year, I was off of all medications I was put on in rehab, including the antidepressants and the mood stabilizers. In the next slide, I talk about my new life. As of today, I've lost 170 pounds. I'm a health coach for Whole Foods Market's Medical and Wellness Center. I'm a speaker for Rip Esselstyn's Engine 2 Total Health Immersions and yearly events. I'm active every day. I love to run. It's how I meditate. And I honestly have a life goal of eating more sweet potatoes than anyone in history. But how did I do this? Now I want to talk to you about how I was able to do this. So in the next slide, I want to talk to you about personal commitments and identifying your why. What do I mean by this? So what has motivated you to make this change? For me, one, I didn't want to be a diabetic. Okay, why not? I didn't want to be overweight. Why not? I didn't want to die. Why not? What about my life did I love enough to want to experience it more completely? What did I have to? That is what you want most in life. When you can identify that, then you can understand the definition of discipline. On the next slide, discipline is choosing between what you want now and what you want most. What I wanted most was not to reverse type 2 diabetes. I had to do that in order to achieve what I wanted most. What I wanted most was I wanted to experience what it was like, what it would be like to have a real relationship with my family, what it would be like to actually feel healthy, and to be the person that I knew I was capable of being. In order to do that, I had to reverse diabetes, lose weight, and not die. Those diagnoses were not the reason I changed. They showed me what about my life I was afraid of losing. Now, in order to do that, I had to understand my compulsions. So I want to talk to you about understanding your compulsions. Next slide. And I think the way that I understood it was reading The Pleasure Trap by Doug Lisle and Alan Goldhammer. And in The Pleasure Trap, they answer this question. If we know what to do to be happy and healthy, then why is it so difficult to do it? I'm going to give you guys a brief overview of what The Pleasure Trap is about, but I highly recommend reading this book or watching the TED Talks. If you go to the next slide, this is the book, and this is the part of The Pleasure Trap that I'm going to talk about today. And what it's showing is our dopamine response to food. That curve that you see is the dopamine response to food. So in the first slide, you're going to see the dopamine response that we have, our relationship that we're supposed to have with food. So dopamine is the chemical that is released in the brain that gives us the feeling of pleasure. And pleasure is our body's way of letting us know that we found something that's biologically beneficial. Doug Lisle and Alan Goldhammer explain that every species on the planet is motivated by three things: pleasure seeking, pain avoidance, and energy conservation. Every instinct in you is telling you to seek the most amount of pleasure for the least amount of pain and the least amount of energy, because those things are going to, if you seek those things, you're going to be biologically successful. So all animals are actually born liking the foods that we've evolved from nature to eat. So whole natural plant foods are what we have evolved from nature to eat, and we're supposed to like them, and we do. But in the second phase, in the next section, this is what happens when we introduce the standard American diet. Foods like cheeseburgers and meat and eggs and oil. What happens is the dopamine response that we get from those foods is much higher. It's a super concentrated form of calories where you're getting a high concentration of oil, salt, and sugar. And you're getting a very high dopamine response. And your body is going to say, this is great. There's far more energy per bite here. This must be the right thing to do. Look at how much more pleasure we get. Let's just keep doing this. But in the next stage, you're going to see what happens. Whenever you have a very intense stimulus that is outside the bounds of normal stimulation, the sensors in the brain are going to get dulled. We're going to end up habituated to these foods. So as you can see, now we're getting the same amount of pleasure that we always got from food, only now, in order to get that pleasure, we have to eat the standard American diet. We keep doing this, and guess what happens? We end up with diagnoses like obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, maybe all three. And this is about the time that you have a friend who says, hey, you know what? Have you heard about Robbie and Cyrus and Mastering Diabetes program? You should listen to what they have to say. And you listen to them. And you hear them, their program. And you say, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to eat the bananas and the mangoes and the potatoes and the beans. This is what I have to do. And then you see what happens on the next slide. So now we have the answer to the question. If we know what to do to be happy and healthy, why is it so difficult to do it? The reason is that when you're eating healthy and you move to junk food, you eat the wrong thing, it feels right. Then when you're eating junk food and you have to go back to eating healthy food, you do the right thing, and it feels wrong. Every instinct in you is telling you to seek the most amount of pleasure for the least amount of pain and the least amount of energy. But when you do that in the modern environment, you end up fooling your instincts and you end up in the pleasure trap. But what does this tell us? This tells us that your compulsions are not a lack of willpower or moral fiber. They are a normal response to the environment that you've been living in. They also say this: you are not broken. Next slide. You're not broken. If you're sitting there saying, oh, this is so difficult, why do I want to keep eating the standard American diet? The reason is because your body is operating exactly the way it's supposed to. Next slide. This is what is supposed to happen in a normally functioning body. It takes about 2 to 3 weeks for that dopamine response to get back to normal. But the great thing is that it does return. It is a biological fact that your dopamine response will normalize to the plant-based diet, and you will enjoy this diet. It's a fact. Next slide. There's nothing wrong with you at all. This is simply a biological response that has to work itself out. Next slide. I'm telling you that there will come a day when this lifestyle is not a chore. And then there will come a day when you actually look forward to this lifestyle. Once I understood that fact, I knew exactly what I had to do. And what I knew I had to do was get up every single day and be comfortable being uncomfortable. This is what I believe is the invariable truth to all lifestyle change and recovery. If I could get up every single day and be comfortable being uncomfortable until that day came when this lifestyle was no longer a chore, and then when that day came when I was actually looking forward to it, then I would be successful. That's what I had to do. I was going to be the person to do it. So the next slide. Creating an environment for positive change. That's what it did for me. Let's see how we do that. First slide. I'm going to tell you right now, preparation beats motivation any day of the week. Motivation is simply an emotion that is fleeting like all emotions. If you are leaving your success up to simply motivation is great. But if you're leaving it up to only motivation, you are creating an environment where there's likelihood for making mistakes. But if you are prepared, motivation aside, preparation will give you the likelihood for success. So how are we prepared? Well, we want to know what we're going to eat a week for the week, well before, by creating a meal plan. Next slide. Know what we're going to eat for the week ahead of time by creating a written meal plan. I did not wake up every single day and say, what am I going to have today? I'm not going to tell you to do what I did, but what I did was I got up every single day and I made oatmeal for breakfast. And then for lunch and dinner, I literally had black beans, broccoli, and fruit every single day for every single meal for 10 months. And that was just simply keeping it simple. Next slide. Keep it simple. You don't have to keep it as simple as I did, but I realized that, next slide, my goal was not to eat every low-fat, whole-food, plant-based recipe on the planet. That's not what I was trying to do. My goal was to be successful and to allow my body to show me what it's capable of if I was able to eat a plant-based diet 100% of the time. Next slide. That is your goal. So say for 7 days you eat one of two breakfasts, one of two different lunches, or one of two different dinners for 7 days just so that you can be successful. That is worth doing. What it also does is it creates an environment. If you have an environment where you have only low-fat, whole-food, plant-based foods at your house, and you only eat at home, because I'm telling you, the one place where you will ever be able to be 100% compliant is at home. If you do that, then regardless of your emotional situation, regardless of whatever you have going on in your life, I can tell you that there were times in therapy, because I was doing 5 hours of therapy a day for 3 months. I would come home from therapy pissed off at the world, angry at myself, angry at my family, angry at the people I was in recovery with. And believe me, I wanted to emotionally eat. But if I emotionally ate a whole food, plant-based, low-fat diet, then at the end of the day, I was still only going to be able to make positive change in regards to my health. Next slide. So what positive environment can do is that it can create an environment where, regardless of your emotional situation, at the end of the day, you will make positive change. Simon Sinek says that when the environment is right, everyone has the capacity for remarkable change. I really believe that that is what a low-fat, whole-food, plant-based diet creates for people in regards to their health. It is that environment for positive change. It does not allow you to damage your health. What an amazing gift that is that we have available to us. In the next slide, I want to talk about how this creates self-care and self-love. So self-care and self-love are daily actions. It is not believing that you're the best looking or the smartest or the fastest or the strongest. It is daily actions that show yourself that you care about and love your life. Next slide. They're actions. They're also affirmations through action that create daily change. So actions are what create change. When I got up every single morning and I prepared a meal on a plate that was about health and wellness, that was about creating a healthier version of myself today than I was the day before, that is an act of self-care. That is an act of self-love. And doing that over and over and over again and creating positive change in yourself creates self-worth. And I'm going to tell you, I know from experience, self-worth makes you feel like you're worth saving. Now, there's a few things that I have absolutely learned for certain over the last 5 years. And on the next slide, I'm going to talk about that. The first is I've had two problems in my life. That's it. The first one, I did not know how to live as a physical person. The only way I knew how to live as a physical person was killing me, and I didn't know any other way to do it. Engine 2 program said, do this. It may not be easy in the beginning, but if you do it, we guarantee you your life will get better. I did it. I just let go, and my life got better. The second problem I had was I didn't know how to live as an emotional person. I also didn't know how to live any other way other than to be angry, entitled, arrogant, and spoiled, and a drug addict. I went into therapy. I said, I'm sick of fighting you guys. I don't know any other way to do this. Tell me another way of living as an emotional person. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. Let's see what happens. They told me what to do. I tried it. It wasn't easy. I was committed, and my life got better. I had two problems. Everything else in my life, the diabetes, the heart disease, the drug addiction, the obesity, all of it were symptoms of those two things. The second thing that I learned was gratitude. Gratitude is vital. I'm grateful for my obesity. I'm grateful for ever being a type 2 diabetic. I'm grateful for ever having heart disease, for ever having erectile dysfunction, for ever being a drug addict, for ever attempting suicide. Because it has shown me how beautiful life can be when you take charge of your life. There's a quote, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act, but a habit." If I get up every single day and I eat a low-fat, whole foods, plant-based diet, if I get up every single day and I'm committed to my sobriety, if I get up every single day and I can be of service to one person, then at the end of that day, I am a happy, healthy, sober person who is of service to other people. It's very important to recognize that the things that we do on a regular basis are the things that create the change in our life and create who we are. Excellence is not an act, but a habit. The last thing I know that I've learned for certain is that the simplest change on your fork can make the most profound change of your life. I'm going to tell you something right now. There is nobody who is listening on this webinar who can't do this. There's nobody in the world who can't do this. There's no can't in anyone. The only reason why I've been able to stay sober for 5 years, lose 170 pounds, reverse heart disease, diabetes, erectile dysfunction. The only reason why Robbie and Cyrus and Tara and Kylie and everyone else gets up every single day and eats a low-fat plant-based diet for every single meal is because we want to. It's never a matter of can or can't. It's a matter of want. Decide what you want most and go for it because it is so worth it. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to come here and share my wisdom, my story. I think that the last thing I'll say is nobody's perfect. Nobody is perfect. I'm not perfect. Robbie's not perfect. Cyrus isn't perfect. Kylie's close. But we're not perfect because we're stronger than that. It is not about being perfect. It is about staying committed. Listen to what Robbie and Cyrus have to say. I'm going to tell you right now, I know a lot of people in the plant-based world who do coaching, and I really believe that there's nobody that comes close to the level of passion and desire to help people and have the knowledge and the tools to do so like Robbie and Cyrus and Mastering Diabetes team. You guys are in great hands. It's been my absolute honor to host a webinar where I talk about my story and the tools that I used. And thank you so much, Robbie and Cyrus, for allowing me to do that.
Oh, for sure, Adam. Your story is so incredibly powerful. It's just like I've heard it probably, 50 times at this point, but I still get choked up every time you think about, what would it have been like to be Adam at that point where, you wouldn't
have wanted to know me, man. I'm telling you.
I know. It's just like the person that I know now, the Adam that I get to hang out with, the Adam that I get to go running with, the Adam that I get to go to the gym with, the Adam that I get to eat food with is fundamentally a different human being than the Adam I'm envisioning used to exist back in the day. And it's like, if you didn't tell me the story, I would have absolutely no idea that your previous circumstances actually ever occurred to you. So my hat's off to you for making such a tremendous change and also being able to share your story and teach other people how to make the change. Because it's one thing to do it for yourself, but it's a completely separate thing to be able to help other people go through the same process.
Well, it's, the thing is that because we know how we know that it works for everybody. And it's almost selfish not to share your knowledge if you know it.
Completely. Well, I know we're going to have a whole bunch of questions for you because the chat box was going kind of crazy while you were talking. So Don't go anywhere. There's a
Okay.
whole bunch more to go.
If you're on the edge, like I just try it. You gotta give yourself a shot, and let us help you. Like, just try it. That's all I can say.
Here, Robbie, if I can say one thing.
Please.
Here's what I tell people that I coach when they say, I really don't know if I can do this. Give it a shot. Try it for 1 month, right? If at the end of the month you say, you know what, it's not for me, no judgment, but you don't know that unless you try. And you're also not going to lose anything by trying. If you try this for 30 days at the end, you don't want to do it, fine, you've lost nothing. But if you don't try it, you could lose everything. You could lose your health. You could lose your life. This is serious stuff. Give it a shot. It's worth it. I'm telling you. This program works. I know it for a fact. Try it. You lose nothing by trying it. You could gain everything by trying it.
100%.
So well said.
So maybe let's go to some questions, because I know there's a ton of questions and lots of really good ones today. So let's go to them.
All right. So let me get to my question spreadsheet. Somebody's asked a question about eating a lot of fruit won't raise A1C. And the short answer to that is 100% correct. Eating a lot of fruit while eating a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet at large will not only will it not increase your A1C, it will actually make it go lower. There's just no question about it. Whole fruit reverses insulin resistance.
Yeah, and we know that it can be very confusing because, wait a minute, fruit contains carbohydrate, and carbohydrate breaks down to glucose. So you're telling me I'm putting more glucose into my mouth, and you want me to believe that my blood glucose is going to become more stable. Here's why it happens. Here's why it works. Because your blood glucose is not only determined by how much carbohydrate goes into your mouth. That's what we've been told to believe over time. It is not a true statement. Your blood glucose is a function of many variables. The first and most important variable is the total fat content that goes into your mouth. If you are operating in a high-fat environment, then trying to eat any version of carbohydrate on top of that is going to send your blood glucose high. If instead you operate in a low-fat environment and truly decrease the total amount of fat going into your mouth, especially the saturated fat, then your ability to eat carbohydrate goes up. So that's why our program works, because we teach you how to adopt a low-fat diet. And once you're in that low-fat economy, then eating carbohydrate-rich foods, including fruits and potatoes and quinoa and foods that, your typical Western doctor would tell you to never touch, those become accessible, and those become the cornerstone of your entire program. Okay. So, let's see here. Okay, Jill says, Adam, on days when you are feeling down, what are some things you can do to pick yourself up and not sabotage what you are doing?
Okay, so there were days when I got really, really angry and just upset, feeling like I honestly felt I was broken. I thought, at the most I might be able to get down to 220 pounds, but I'll never really ever be fit again. I honestly believe that. It's a flawed thinking. And the problem is when you have a flawed image of yourself, an idea of yourself that isn't based on fact, then the way you approach most things is from a flawed point of view. But sometimes I would just be angry, and that's okay, because emotions aren't wrong. They just are. And if you're angry, be angry. And luckily, I had a friend who said, dude, if you need an enemy or someone to yell at, you can yell at me. I would just be angry. Sometimes I would go for a walk. I started to run. Running for me became part of my recovery, because running is in itself an act of being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And it allowed me to sort of clear my mind and get out of the space where all that anxiety was happening. Sometimes, like I said, I would emotionally eat. I would go literally steam a pound of broccoli, cover it with some Engine 2 or oil-free sauce, like an oil-free marinara, and eat the entire thing in one sitting. But there was no way I was going to allow any emotion to put food in my mouth that was going to damage my health or set me back. If I wanted to throw a fit, fine. If I wanted to emotionally eat, fine. But it was going to be the low-fat plant-based diet. If I wanted to get angry and yell, I was going to do it until I finally developed the tools to deal with those emotions better. But my actions were not going to be in any way detrimental in terms of what I put into my body. And that just comes from recognizing that I was in a very serious situation. I was going to die in probably less than 5 years if I kept doing what I was doing, probably much sooner than that. If that means in order to live a life of health and happiness, I never got to have another cheeseburger, that's fine. I had a good run. Believe me, I had my share of cheeseburgers. I can live without them. But it was worth it to be committed to just see what was possible. And if at the end of the, however long I wanted to go, if I just finally gave up, at least give myself the opportunity.
100%. I love, Adam, one of the things I love about you is that your resolve is just so strong, right? You're saying you were never going to let your emotions get in the way of your habits. And,
right.
That's something that I think, a lot of people are sort of like, oh, like I just don't have strong enough willpower and I just give in to my willpower, So
yeah.
When you hear that, how can people sort of start to rethink this whole game and this whole question mark of willpower?
So, really understanding the pleasure trap goes into that recognizing that, okay, so people, a lot of times, I honestly thought like, hey, there's something about me. I've been gifted a poor genetic hand. Just fat and type 2 diabetic because of my genetics, and it's simply not true. The reason I was 320 plus pounds, the reason I was a type 2 diabetic and had high blood pressure and erectile dysfunction, and the reason I was a drug addict was because that's what is supposed to happen when you eat the types of foods that I was eating and you do the amount of drugs that I was doing. That's a normal response. That is my body functioning normally. There was nothing wrong with me at all. If I change the way that I interact with my environment, if I change my environment and eat a plant-based diet, my normal body should respond normally to it. And I was going to allow myself to see what was happening, what was possible if I did it. And it's simply, it's like I said, you have to decide between what you want now and what you want most. And, if you think about it, so I work at the Whole Foods Market Medical and Wellness Center. If you can commit to it 100% for 7 days, you can see drastic enough results that will compel you to do it another 7 days. I am not asking anybody here on this webinar to do this for the rest of their life. I'm asking them to commit to your program and see what's possible. Nobody can commit to something for the rest of their lives, but you can do something for 30 days and see what's possible, and then make an informed decision about if you want to go further. I honestly believe that you will. I'm kind of willing to bet anything on it, that if you do what the Mastering Diabetes program says 100% of the time for 30 days, you will see the results that are typical of this lifestyle. I almost 100% guarantee it. I have a patient who had a stroke a month ago, who had mild facial paralysis, came in with a blood sugar that was unreadable on the glucometer. It was over 600. I've been health coaching this patient for 2 weeks. His blood sugar, I got an email from this patient, his blood sugar the other day, 85. This person was on death's door and committed to it 100%, and he got the results that sound amazing, but that's what's supposed to happen. I'm telling you, this is not special reserved for people. Some people get these results and some people don't. Everybody gets these results. Give your body the time that it needs to show you that it can.
Absolutely. No question. No question at all. Adam, there's a couple questions in here about juicing.
Sure.
The question is, how do you feel about juicing? My juicer seems to remove a lot of pulp and or fiber. Is that okay?
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Okay. I always say eat the food. All right. We were designed, and we have evolved from nature to eat food. That's how we extract nutrients. Fiber is very, very important. Specifically in the diabetes realm, fiber, you want that fiber. You do not want those sugars to be just in liquid form. They get absorbed very quickly. You want to eat the food. There's also another great benefit that comes from chewing your food, and this goes into heart disease. But when you chew your food, you have these facultative anaerobic bacteria that exist in your mouth. And what they do is they start to interact with the nitrates in your food, and they convert them to nitrites. And then in the gut, those nitrites are converted to nitric oxide. And that is added to your nitric oxide pool. Now, nitric oxide is what is necessary for vascular dilation, right? It is the life jacket. It's what's produced by the endothelial cells of your blood vessels that create your blood vessels' ability to dilate, and also to keep your blood flowing smoothly. So chewing your food is a huge tool in preventing cardiovascular disease, and fiber is what feeds your gut microbiome. You want to be changing the microbiome of your gut flora. You want that beneficial bacteria. You want that fiber feeding it. So I would say eat the food.
Absolutely. Another thing too is that we've noticed that people who consume who drink juices, their blood glucose goes much higher, much quicker, and it makes perfect physiological sense because when the fibers break, and the fiber basically just slows the rate at which glucose is absorbed into your blood.
Exactly.
And when that fiber is gone because you left it in the juicer, then you're basically, it has the same effect as if you were just eating a tablespoon of white sugar. It's very hard to control your blood glucose while juicing, and therefore, if you choose to juice, do your best to make sure it's a purely vegetable juice. Rather than that, if you want to use a blender, you could blend things into a smoothie, but please, please, please keep the fiber in as much as possible.
Yeah, if you're type 1 or severely insulin resistant type 2, juicing, specifically in the beginning, is something that I would sort of shy people away from doing.
Absolutely. So here's a statement from Jill. Jill basically says, "Hey, you're a huge inspiration. Thank you for sharing and for showing so much strength. You inspired me in Idlewild, which is a retreat that we've had back in July, and you continue to inspire me through your posts on Instagram. Thank you so much."
Oh, thank you, Jill. That means a lot to me. It really does. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Sorry. Adam, do you have any books, recommended books for recipes?
I do. So the Engine 2 7-Day Rescue Diet book is great because the 7-Day Rescue Challenge, the 7-Day Rescue Diet, is a little more strict on the fat intake than the Engine 2 diet because it's based on what we do at the immersions. So it's closer to what you guys recommend. There are great books out there. The Forks Over Knives plan, the Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease cookbook is a great one because I know that for a fact that Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn is very strict on fat intake when he's working with heart disease patients. So that's a great one that should be pretty compliant with your program. Other than that, Rip and Jane have a new cookbook coming out on the 26th called the Engine 2 cookbook. There's like 170 maybe recipes that are going to be in that one. It's going to be all new recipes. It's supposed to be great.
Wow, I can't wait for that. Fantastic.
But in terms of the way I eat, I mean, I keep it simple. I still to this day, I eat a sweet potato with a side of butternut squash with some cinnamon on top of it and some fruit and some greens. And it's really not these culinary masterpieces that you see on Instagram. See, that's the confusing thing about Instagram. You see somebody's Instagram page and you see the elaborate, unbelievably beautiful plates, and you think that that's how they eat for every meal, when maybe some of them do, but for the most part, it's really just we keep it simple. I batch cook a bunch of potatoes and rice and beans, and I have a ton of fruit and greens in my refrigerator. And I come home and I just sort of assemble a plate of a mixture of those things.
Yeah, exactly. Keeping it simple it's one of the cornerstones of your entire philosophy. And you're right, your goal is not to make a whole bunch of very elaborate meals that are incredibly varied. It's literally, when I was just hanging out with Adam for last week, and I had a fantastic time with him. And the entire time we were together, we were eating things like we ate purple potatoes, we ate oatmeal, we ate bananas, we ate sweet potatoes, and we had butternut squash. That's 5 foods that we were eating for like 80% of the time. And we loved it. Absolutely loved it. We would look forward to it.
Except for the sweet potato ice cream that we tried to make. It was an utter failure.
Yes, don't make sweet potato ice cream. That's the moral of the story. So somebody else writes a question, says, what if your spouse does not want to eat this way, but you do? What are you supposed to do in that situation?
Okay, so when I was in sober living with 12 other people who none of them were eating the way I was. And the fact is that I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for me. And if that means for a certain period of time, I have to eat different, have different food, eat differently than everyone else, maybe have some issues come up where it's like, oh, you're eating that, where are you going to get your protein, that whole nonsense. That's really not about me. That's about maybe, whatever is going on with someone else. And then what happens is after a while, I started getting questions like, wow, you're losing a lot of weight. You got off your medications. What are you doing? I was an example for change that might inspire other people. But at the end of the day, remember, you have to help yourself first. So if your significant other is not willing to change, but you are, then do it. And create an environment for change in your home. And say that, you know what? I know you don't want to do this with me, but I really want to. And I'm going to do it at the home, and I know you're not going to, and I'm okay with that, but can you be supportive of my changes while I'm doing this? Make it about the behavior that you want to change. And say, I need help changing my behavior. I'm not going to change who I am. This doesn't change anything about me or my relationship with you. I just need to change some behavior so that I can be a better version of myself. Will you help me? Will you be supportive? You don't have to do anything. Just be supportive of my decision to do this.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay. What about whole grains and gluten-containing products?
Okay. So here's the thing. From my understanding, true gluten intolerance is a very rare thing. Most of the time when you see a gluten sensitivity, it is due to the poor health of your gut microbiome. So you go on a plant-based diet, remove the gluten if you want to for a little bit, go on a very clean plant-based diet, low-fat plant-based diet, and then what happens is a month later you introduce some gluten back in, you'll see that there's really no sensitivity there at all. It was just the health of your gut microbiome. But whole grains are incredibly healthy. Whole grains are great, and you don't have to eat grains with gluten in them. I am a huge fan of whole grains. I eat oats every single morning. I've eaten them every single morning for the last 5 years. Brown rice is fantastic. Today I had a bowl with brown rice and lentils and mushrooms and all kinds of wonderful things in them. They're a cornerstone of health. I would never shy away from grains.
Yes, fully agree with that. Only 2% of the population, technically speaking, has a gluten intolerance. And those people have what's called celiac disease, which is an autoimmune disease. The other 98% of the population does not have gluten insensitivity. Does not have a autoimmune gluten insensitivity. But a slightly larger proportion of the population actually has what's called a non-celiac gluten sensitivity, NCGS. Point being is that if you're part of the 95%, chances are there's absolutely no problem when it comes to gluten. That means you can eat wheat, barley, rye, spelt, and all the other grains, period. But if you do have a gluten sensitivity, it's okay. It's not that big of a deal because all you do is simply eliminate wheat, barley, rye, and spelt, and then boom, now you can have all of the other grains. You can have quinoa, you can have brown rice, you can have wild rice, you can have black rice, you can have millet, you can have all of these foods, and it's really not a problem. Okay, so Cindy writes a very, very, very good question. She says, not to be negative, but how come some people that are not diabetic or obese can get away with eating meat and oil and cookies? Also, I thought the research showed that obese people have to take in less calories than most other people who stayed normal weight because their brains crave the hormone that is released from their brains to stimulate feeling satiated. Is this a myth? Does that question make sense to you?
Yeah, so when you say that people get away with eating meat and oil because they're not overweight and they don't have type 2 diabetes. So look, we can't discount genetics here, all right? And I like to put it this way: genetics loads the gun, and lifestyle pulls the trigger. Okay, some people, like myself, I'm genetically predisposed to building those intramyocellular lipids and developing insulin resistance very rapidly. And I ate a diet full of meat and oil and did it very quickly. That's true. That doesn't mean that isn't occurring in someone who is thin, who isn't type 2 diabetic yet, who isn't developing heart disease, who isn't eating a diet that creates an environment of so much inflammation, of so much destructive effects on the endothelial function, of so much fat intake, that those conditions aren't going to occur later. We have to stop assuming that the person who is thin and can lift a lot of weight is therefore healthy. It is always a matter of lifestyle. Most diseases are a result of inflammation. And a diet that has meat and oil has a high level of oxidative stress. That oxidative stress is creating tons of inflammation. And then about the hormone being released from the brain for people who are overweight, I've never heard of that. Robbie, I don't know if you have. I know that I've never had to worry about eating less calories because the diet that the low-fat plant-based diet is by nature a low-calorie density diet. So we know that the average person needs somewhere between 3 to 5 pounds of food a day, depending on no matter what diet they eat. And the calorie density of a low-fat plant-based diet is somewhere around, 300 to 500 calories per pound. So you really can't overeat. So I don't have to worry about how much I eat. I don't have to worry about the calories. I know that I'm going to reach my optimal health eventually just by sticking to the diet.
Absolutely. And I would almost change the verbiage. I don't like to actually use the word diet because a diet is something that you use to, specifically to lose
exactly. Weight. You're right. It's lifestyle.
Lifestyle. Exactly. That's just me being nitpicky. But point being is
do it.
Yeah. It's important to think of this as, this is a collection of habits that do happen to be centered around food. But just because of that doesn't necessarily mean it's a diet as much as it is a lifestyle change.
Okay, so what Cindy is saying right now is she's saying, "I'm sorry, hormones released from the gut stimulates the brain." Cindy? Are you talking about the fact that the visceral fat of gut around your gut actually is metabolic and produces its own estrogen? Because that is something that has been talked about as being what makes people who are obese, makes it more difficult to lose weight. But I don't think you certainly don't have to calorie restrict or portion control on this lifestyle at all in regards to
that. Okay, so let's wait for her to hear back from her.
She said yes.
She said yes. Okay, perfect. Okay, here's another question from Laura. I can eat whole food plant-based for a meal and be very full but not satisfied. I feel I need to have something like that I really enjoy, like ice cream. Okay. How do you get over that?
All right, perfect. Okay, so this goes into understanding the pleasure trap, that ice cream creates a dopamine response that is very, very high, much higher than what you're getting right now from the whole food plant-based diet. And that dopamine response makes you feel comfortable and safe and happy. It's what it's supposed to do. So while you may enjoy the taste and the flavor of the plant-based diet and eat a large portion, it's not going to give you the same amount of comfort in the beginning. But like I said, that dopamine response will normalize anytime you take a sense and you put it under deprivation. That's a great way to increase your sensitivity. So you're actually increasing the sensitivity of your brain's dopamine response by eating this diet. And eventually, believe me, you are going to get immense amount of pleasure from eating a large volume of low-fat plant-based foods. I'm telling you, if you think that I am any less addicted to the lifestyle I live now as I was eating those 10,000 calories of fast food, you'd be fooling yourself. There's no Spartan-esque strength of will that I need in order to sit down and eat a pile of baked sweet potatoes. I'll tell you right now, I will never tell you that this diet is harmful to your health unless you are standing between me and a baked sweet potato. Then you're in harm's way. That is how much I love this food. And I'm being honest when I tell you that before I started this, if I tried a sweet potato, it would make me gag.
Is that right? I didn't even know that.
Yep. Could not eat them.
Wow. Yeah, that's just yeah, your taste
It's
buds
just simply being comfortable with being a little bit uncomfortable for a certain period of time. It will change. You will start to be satisfied by these foods. You will get that comfort. It will give you what you're looking for. Allow yourself the opportunity to get there.
Yes, and one thing that also might help is to really, really, really opt for foods that are very calorie dense. Not to the point where you're overeating on calories, but Dr. Matt Lederman and I hosted a webinar for Dr. Matt Lederman as part of the Forks Over Knives webinar series. And one of the things he talked about is in phase one of your meal, at the very beginning of your meal, make sure that you're consuming foods that have an appropriate calorie density such that you feel full. You generally feel full, right? So if you're eating, tomatoes and cucumbers and hoping that that's going to keep you full, good luck. That'll keep you full for about 7 minutes. If you really want to feel full, it's necessary to eat, foods that have higher calorie density, like potatoes, like squash, like corn, like quinoa. And don't be afraid of the carbohydrate content of these foods because, again, if you're operating in a low-fat environment, then these are not going to spike your blood glucose if that's a concern. So you eat foods that are calorie dense, and then it actually keeps you a lot fuller, not only at that meal, but for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 hours afterwards. And then you can, like Adam says, over the course of time, developed a much more change the relationship that you have with these calorie dense plant-based options and find that you actually don't need to gravitate towards the ice cream anymore because you know what? It's just not something that you're looking for.
Or do what I'm going to do as soon as this is over is make a giant bowl of banana ice cream. This stuff is great.
That's another great option. Can I have some too? Okay. So Karen asks, she says, Adam, do you have a Facebook group?
I have a Facebook page called Plant Based Addict. And then I have an Instagram by the same handle at Plant Based Addict. You can follow me on Facebook at Adam Sudd as well. I'm also part of the Engine 2 7-Day Rescue Challenge page and a part of the Mastering Diabetes page. And so I don't have my own Facebook group, but I have the pages.
Absolutely, yeah. So we Adam is part of our private Facebook group that you get when you join the Mastering Diabetes program, and he's a resource for everyone. So and when he chimes in when there's questions that are related to pleasure trap, that are related to overeating, that are related to food addiction, and then also if you specifically want to communicate with him, just tag him and he'll get right back to you.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's another one. Let's go for maybe 2 more questions here. Kate says she's living with type 1 diabetes, and her work day / work week / daily grind gets me down and exhausted. Still trying to get over the hump of, quote, rewarding myself with unhealthy food. How do I do this?
Well, first you need to stop saying it's a reward. You need to recognize what it is, okay? That it is an action that is detrimental to your health. And recognize that what's happening is when you feel bad, when you feel low energy, when you feel sort of emotionally compromised, and your brain, your biology knows that there's something that you do on a regular basis that spikes your dopamine response, it gives you a lot of pleasure, it's going to compel you to continue doing that behavior. You have to separate yourself from that behavior long enough that it can be removed from the experience of your daily life, and your body won't be compelled to do it again because it will no longer know that it's part of your daily environment. That's part of that being comfortable with being uncomfortable and creating new habits, acting less on impulse and more on planned actions when it comes to food, operating for what's the part of your brain called the basal ganglia, where your habits are formed. That's why meal plans work. That's why when you go into your house and remove the foods that you're not supposed to eat and create an environment where it's only the foods that you know will create positive change. And then, for the first 2 weeks, don't eat out. It's 2 weeks. Give yourself the opportunity to eat from an environment where you're going to be 100% compliant all the time, even if you are emotionally eating.
Absolutely. That's a great point you bring up. Yeah, this dopamine response can be kind of challenging because, every time you eat these concentrated salt, oil, and sugar foods, they hit your brain over the head with just so much pleasure. Yeah. And it's so short-lived that it's almost, it mimics the action of a narcotic, it mimics the
really
action
does.
Of cocaine.
But it's important to realize that it's not because you don't have willpower.
No.
It's not because you're lacking any moral fiber of being able to stick to a plan, and it's just your compulsions are still showing up, and you really just, you don't feel good. I just want a cheeseburger. That's because your body's responding exactly how it's supposed to, because it knows that food with that high dopamine response, that cheeseburger, is somehow now part of your environment. And it doesn't know that it doesn't know that food is unhealthy. It just sees the dopamine response. It just sees the calories. Your body literally believes it's the most biologically beneficial thing for you to do. It is exactly what it's supposed to be compelling you to eat. So recognize there's nothing wrong with you. You just have to separate yourself from that behavior for about 2 weeks, and then it's not such a chore anymore. Mm-hmm. And then eventually you're going to wake up, you're not even going to think about it. I promise you.
Yep. Brilliant. Okay, one last question here. This is from Balvinder Bill. The question is, have you heard about Dr. Glidden? He talks about curing or reversing diabetes with minerals and vitamins.
Well, that's what you're doing, only yours come from food.
Yeah.
I haven't heard about Dr. Glidden, but I'm not a big fan of supplements other than B12 and D3. I think that they do more harm than good.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. So that's pretty much the answer right there. All right. Well, it looks like we covered most of the questions here. I think this has been a huge success. And Adam, once again, we totally appreciate and totally value your input and your perspective here, because once again, your story is incredibly powerful, but more important than your story is your ability to guide other people. And, if I'm going to brag on Adam's behalf, I'm going to do it right now. Adam works at the Whole Foods Medical Center in Austin. And Adam, how long have you been working there for now, Adam?
A year.
He's been there for a year. Okay. So he's less experienced as a health coach than a lot of the other health coaches there. However, Adam gets the tough cases now. Adam gets the people that nobody else can help. Adam gets the people who don't seem to be responding to sort of traditional methods. As soon as they get in front of Adam, boom, within a week, these people are fundamentally changed from the inside out. His techniques are incredibly powerful. They work. They absolutely work. And if you join the Mastering Diabetes program, like I said earlier, you'll be able to interact with him in our Facebook group and continue to learn from him and hopefully transform your relationship with food from the inside out.
I appreciate that, Cyrus, but it is always a team effort at any wellness center.
This is true, but I'm trying to brag on your behalf.
I know.
I'm not going to take back anything I just said. Fantastic.
This has been amazing. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody who has stayed with us and asked questions. We really appreciate you coming.
Thank you, guys.
All right, everybody. Have a great night. Hope to see you in our program.
All right.